Okay, so I'll press record and we'll get started.
Very good. Okay, so today we are starting on slide number 233, which is starting on the Mars calendar. We have finished Jubilee and other calendars, and we worked our way all the way back to Adam through the flood on, especially with the Jubilee calendar, but on all of the calendars testify that Adam and Eve were real and the events were real events in the Garden of Eden time and afterward, and had dates associated with them. Now we're going to do something new. As this picture 233 shows, there's a big difference between the Mars calendar. We looked at the Mercury and Venus calendars together, and they were very similar with similar patterns. And that was partly because they're both closer to the sun than the Earth. And if you draw the pictures and think about it, that means they both will be morning and evening stars. Mars, on the other hand, is not a morning and evening star, meaning it's only up in mornings or evenings. Mars can be up all night, and all of the outer planets can be up. They can rise at sunset like a full moon and go across the whole sky at night and set in the morning. That's called opposition. In fact, if you look at this, well, we'll look at more detail soon. But the point is, they have a very different life cycle, which are more clear on certain parts and less clear on others. So let's look at that. Slide 234. This shows both Mars and Venus. And in this picture, it's tricky because the Earth is really moving around the sun. But in this picture, both the sun and the Earth are stationary. We're riding on the Earth, and it's designed to be seen as if the Earth were fixed. So in this picture, they're both fixed. If you look at the direction, for instance, that Venus is going around the sun, excuse me, in real life, with the sun at the center, all the planets are going around in the same direction. But if you look at the sun, the Earth is fixed. If you look at the arrows on the Venus cycle, it's going around counterclockwise, and the Mars is going around counterclockwise, and that's because one's going faster than the Earth and the other slower, and so they look like opposite directions. Looking first at Venus, just for a review, you can see that Venus disappears in the sun twice. So it's the morning star on the right side where it rises and sets in the morning, and then it disappears for quite a long time, and then rises and sets in the evening and disappears only for a little time. And so if you remember, we'll review it in a minute, but the rising and setting represented birth and death for the evening star. Now look out at Mars on the outside. When it goes around, it only disappears in the sunlight one time. And that, well, we'll see in a minute how this ties to the life cycle. But just notice it's actually going the opposite direction through the sky. And there's just one rising and setting. So let's go to the next slide, 235. And here we're going to learn about retrograde motion. This is something not really observed as such on the two inner planets. They have something similar to it, but it's not it's not dramatic like this. When you look at any of the outer planets, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, any of them, start at position 1. First of all, just look at the effect, in the upper dotted white line. The effect in the sky is really strange. The planet goes to the left for quite a while and then stops at position 4 and goes backwards. That's why it's called the retrograde motion. And then it goes forward again. Now, we just saw in the last picture that there's no period in the Mars cycle that it actually stops and goes backwards. So what is going on? Well, now look at the 2 pictures of the Earth and Mars below, and they're both going around in the same direction from right to left in this picture, counterclockwise around the sun. But you can just draw a line from Earth number 1 to Mars number 1, and it shows where it is in the sky. And then number 2, number 3. Basically, what's happening is the Earth is going faster than Mars around the sun. And it passes it. So just like when you're in a car and you pass another car, it appears to be going backwards. You've all probably done that at a stoplight where, you're stopped and the car next to you is moving. You're not sure if you're moving or it's moving. But anyway, when you pass a car, if you think of the car, your car is still, and the other one looks like it goes backwards. And then at a certain point, it turns around and goes forward. So if you look at this, it really goes a long way. It only goes backwards from points 4 to 6, but it from point 1 to 9, from point 9 to the next point 1 is half of the cycle, and it jumps very quickly. Well, at first it'll disappear in the sun after this. The retrograde motion is when it is opposite from the Earth. See, look at the picture. The sun and the Earth are lined up. Mars is exactly opposite the sun. That means that number 5 is the day on which, if it were the moon, you'd call it a full moon, a full Mars. Mars rises at sunset, goes all the way across the sky at night, and sets. It's the king of the night for that night. Well, that is right in the middle of retrograde motion. So most of the time when you're seeing Mars, a lot of it, it's going backwards in this retrograde motion. And symbolically, as it says at the bottom of the page, oh, I was going to say how fast it goes. And so it just stays, for all that time, it stays in one constellation. It takes about 12, Mars is 2 years, Jupiter is 12 years. Let's just say it goes very quickly to the next constellation. It starts out going quickly, then it disappears in the sun, and you can't see it. And when it reappears, it's jumped all the way over. It's jumped quite a way to the next place it's going to do its retrograde. So you tend to see it in one constellation, then it jumps quite a bit. And it takes 2 years for Mars, almost exactly 2 years, to go around the sun, a little bit more. So in life symbolism, retrograde motion is ideal to represent going backwards. Remember, the adult phase of Mars, so it's kind of associated with teenager and adults, when you start to question everything, and especially faith in God and things like that, and you tend to go backwards. You tend to strike off on your own, trust yourself, and then as you mature, you find out you don't want to trust yourself. You want to believe in God, and you repent, and you have to be born again. So point number 4 up here where you start going backward is the adult phase, and then there is no number. There is no phase of opposition, and then the very next phase, we'll see it in the next slide. The next slide is going to be at point 6 where you're reborn. Let's go to the next slide, 236. Here I have put the numbers on the 9 phases. Mars has exactly the same 9 phases as Venus. But in this picture, you can see how they're in very different places, remembering that Venus is actually going around the other way. In both Mars and Venus, going from phase 2, which is quickening, after conception is quickening when the spirit enters the body and it enters darkness, leaves the light of the pre-existence and goes into the dark womb. And 3 is when it's born. So Mars and Venus both agree that birth is when it's on the far side of the sun. And then in Mars, it goes a long time from birth to number 4, adult, at the beginning. And so number 4 shows where the beginning of retrograde motion is. That's actually, the angle here isn't perfect. It might be farther out than this. It's 78 days. So I've tried to, it's not a real long time. By the way, that's 6. Other numbers are all important. 6 is like an incomplete backward number, and 6 times 13 is 78. It's 6 Tricinas. Anyway, 4 to 5 is rebirth. And then Venus died. 6 was death, and 7 was resurrection. Instead of death, and they're only 13 days apart, instead of death and resurrection, Mars is translated. It doesn't die, doesn't go into the ground. And all of the outer planets are translated. They tend to represent higher things. Mercury and Venus tend to represent life on Earth more, where you have birth and death and resurrection. And the others are translated, and they're higher priesthoods. And Mars is going to mostly represent Aaronic priesthood. And I haven't done Jupiter and Saturn yet, but I'm supposing Jupiter is Melchizedek and Saturn is patriarchal. And I've never really been inspired to work on those two, and it might be because we're not fully ready for those two priesthoods. I don't know. I just know that every time I pray to know if I should work on them, the answer is no, do other things first, which need to be done, which are more fundamental. So it's translated, and then there's resurrection and fullness and becoming Lord, and then goes back to creation and quickening. Now with Venus, several of these points had to do with rising and setting and brightest spot. On Venus, there were only a couple of points where I had to figure out. It was one of them is 1 and 9. And all of the rest are kind of marked by orbital positions. With Mars, it was a lot of work, and it took me a couple of tries to find the positions of all of these phases late after death, between resurrection and becoming like God. They're not marked by orbital positions so much, but they were able to be detected. Okay, let's go to 237. Now the Mars cycle is 779.93 days. That is so close to 780. And 780 is exactly 3 sacred rounds. So the Mars cycle, I mean, it is really close to 700 to the exact number of sacred rounds. cycle as seen from the Earth. That won't be the number in your encyclopedia or Google. This is the period of the synodic period, it's called, not the sidereal. It's as seen from the Earth, not from the sun. But that's so close to 780 that in order to keep it locked in, and given that you have to skip 13 whole days when you make any correction to the orbital, that it's many centuries to correct it. For example, one birth on Mars was on the day one eagle on the sacred round at Adam's birth. 700 days is 3 sacred rounds, and it still fell on one eagle until Enoch was born on one birth, one eagle, 692 years later. So that's how long a Mars age is. Can be. It can be as long as nearly 700 years. Some of them are as short as 300 years. So that you have to figure out how the Lord does it. But anyway, so there are ages of Mars throughout history that are long ages. Oh, here's the table of the ages, 238. On the slide number 238, you should see a table. Ages on the Mars calendar as multiples of 13 cycles. So they're all 13 whole cycles as a unit. See, again, counting cycles like days. And they're all on a day named zero birth. And they're in reverse order of Trasinas. Trasinas being 13 years. Meaning, the reverse order of Trasinas, meaning, if you look at Trasinas, when I said see slide 337, you don't have to go there, but that was where I listed the Trasinas in order. Well, the Trasinas in order, look at the bottom of this list, skull. After skull comes storm, then grass, serpent. You read this list upward, and you get the order of Trasinas. Because you're skipping a 13-day Trasina, it goes backwards. And so the ages, the 20 years of the Trasina, it's not quite 20, I think. It's 5 and 10 and 15, 16. It looks like 17 ages, if I counted that right. 17 is an unusual number, but I still counted right. No, wait a minute. I'm sorry. 5, 10, yes. 15, 17 ages. The meaning of the symbol, priesthood, light, materialism, these meanings were given way back when we studied the Trasinas. Each of these ages seems to have a leader. And this gives the length of the Mars age in terms of the number of cycles, and then the actual beginning year going from 4000 BC to 3000 AD, with us basically 7,000 years. 7,130, 140, it looks like. So, or 136, I guess. And that can be like the little season. The real life for the Earth is 7,000 plus a little season of about 150 to 250 years. Anyway, that's my stab at guessing a leader of these. I've thrown in King Alfred, who brought reading and civilization to England, King Arthur, Martin Luther, George Washington. I'm not sure of all these, but I did pray a lot to see if there were, in fact, leaders and who they were. And remember, these are like ages of Aaronic priesthood leaders, or maybe no priesthood, maybe political. And that's why I'm allowing all these different people. Okay, let's go. We're almost done. Let's go to 239. Now, there's a uniform version of the Mars calendar. And of course, like the other uniform, it never skips nor inserts any leap days. And it turns out its cycle is always 780 days, but its cycle, remember there were only 17 on the last chart, 17 different ages. The uniform Mars calendar is different. It's like an 18th. It's different from all of the others. Again, the purpose of the uniform version is to do things differently, to provide a calendar when the regular calendar is not available. So I think it was for that reason that the uniform calendar has all the same dates of creation, quickening, and there's only one minor holy day. That doesn't have, the other one had death, adult and death were minor on the Venus cycle. This one just has one minor holy day on the Mars calendar. So each uniform Mars day always occurs on the same day of the sacred round. So yes, one rebirth. Oh yeah, look at this one match up. Rebirth, the symbol for rebirth on the sacred round is one serpent. Serpent means rebirth. So on the uniform Mars calendar, those two always coincide. On the Mars calendar, they never coincide. So there you go. Translation is light. A lot of them fit pretty well. Fullness is reed, which is resurrection. Not all of them are perfect, but the one minor day adult fits one deer, and one deer, it was the day of the fall of Adam, or the day of mortality starting when they left the garden. And anyway, these line up surprisingly well. Okay, let's look at one more. Until I made these slides, I called Prime. Prime is a name I called Mars, which I borrowed from the Venus calendar. And making these slides, I realized Prime is misnamed. And as of the first time I made this slide, I changed it to Rebirth because that fits ending retrograde motion to go again forward. Prime in the Venus calendar was where it was brightest. So you were brightest in your life when you were reborn. Whereas Mars is brightest at opposition. So here I show, and Mars is opposite the Earth, right in the center of retrograde motion. That's when it's brightest, but that's not even a phase in this system. So let's stop there and go to questions. So we're stopping on 240. And I have something to announce before. Oh, I don't have Zoom running, so somebody will have to read me questions from the chat.
I could do that.
Okay, before we go to questions, let me say something that's happened this week, because part of the fun of this class is you get real-time information that's just being discovered now. And I want to share what's just happened in the last couple of days, actually. I had a dream. I can't remember if I've mentioned it here or not, but I had a dream about 2 weeks ago that made it clear that I didn't understand the Enoch calendar yet. I've been trying to figure out the intercalation of the star calendar. And I had a dream that told me that I actually thought I was about done with the star calendar. And the dream told me that I not only wasn't done with that, I hadn't even finished the Enoch calendar, which I thought was done 2 years ago. And that before I go on to any other calendars, I need to finish Enoch and get it exactly right. I have it mostly right, but but to fine tune when you put in the leap weeks. And then I would know more about how to do the star calendar. I've worked on that for a couple of weeks, and just last Sunday, I published a paper on intercalating both those calendars, Enoch and the star calendar. I didn't notify anybody about it because I knew the work wasn't finished, and it's kind of boring for most people. They don't care exactly how the weeks are put in. But I'm doing it partly because there's people now trying to program my work and reproduce it, so it can not only carry on, but so it's available on a platform that runs, because my conversion programs don't run on most browsers anymore. And I haven't had time to, I don't want to rewrite them all in a new language. So I've worked on the Enoch calendar, and I thought things were good enough a week ago to publish a preliminary report on how intercalation is done, and my best model so far on the Enoch calendar, which I actually still thought was, I knew it wasn't perfect, but it was the best I could do. And I felt to write the paper. For anybody that reads that, I will tell you it's going to be renamed Part 1. And in about, as soon as I can, which may not be for a couple of weeks because there's a lot of things happening, maybe sometime in April, I hope to publish Part 2. And I'll just tell you, I right now believe Part 2 will have not entirely, a much more elegant and amazing intercalations technique, which will remove any doubt that this calendar comes from God and that the sun, moon, solar system was designed right down to the day. See, some of the calendars I've done so far I could have made for almost anything in the sky. They wouldn't have all lined up on holy days in history, but the technique could be used on other planets or other celestial bodies. The one that God actually uses has his name written all over it. I won't say more now because it's not done, but in the spirit of sharing while things are being discovered, just know that there'll be a Part 2 to that, which it'll give very, very similar answers, but it will be elegant and simple, and to me, amazing. So that's okay, a little heads up there. So somebody read me a question and we'll go from here.
All right. And thanks for sharing that, John, too. Look forward to that. Ash sent a question, it was to everyone, and stated, Mercury just got out of retrograde on March 28th and had great effects upon the energy projected on those upon the Earth. Does Mars in retrograde have a similar effect?
Okay, first of all, I'm not exactly even sure. I know in astrology they talk about Mercury retrograde and make a big deal of it. And I right now can't even point on the orbit of Mercury to what they're talking about, because it's so different from Mars and Venus, and it's not talked about by astronomers, whereas retrograde for Mars is something you teach in a basic astronomy class because you can see it going backwards. Whereas the others, so number one, I'm not even sure what that means. Number two, in astrology, I have no idea anything about energy fields and how it affects things. I'm just not into astrology. So answer three is, I have no idea if Mars does anything similar. That one, for those things, you have to look up somebody that studies astrology and decide for yourself if you believe it or not. I think there's something to astrology. I've never studied it, so I don't know which parts are viable and which are not. So I don't know. Are there other questions?
Yeah, so Russell, to everybody, stated the lengths are 78, 117, 338. Why never 234?
Oh, I don't know the reason for all those numbers. They're all multiples of 13. The 117 we've already seen is called the Merc. That's a well-known unit. 78 is that these units are the actual lengths. If you look up in an astronomy book, how long is the retrograde motion of Mars? I believe it says it might even say exactly 78. It's something like 76 or 77. But rounded off, these all have to be multiples of 13. So it really is 78 days. Because that one, see, look at I'm back looking at, well, you don't have to look at a picture. That is something between an actual phase of Mars where you can look and see when it's at beginning retrograde and see when it's in standstill positions, when it reverses and goes to rebirth. So that one can be known. The other ones that had to be deduced in space, like from 6 on, I actually had to publish a corrected paper because I didn't have them all corrected first. These were done by matching to the other dates in history where, for instance, I believe the resurrection of Christ, I'm not, no, it's not, it's on quickening, so it's not on resurrection. But just looking at dates in history, most of these were deduced, and I've changed them slightly by about, maybe 13 days one way or the other to have them fit where you can see what it's supposed to be by looking at the dates which are testified by Mercury and the other ones. So the ones that are iffiest on this list are from 6 to 9. But other than that, so these are fit. I didn't pick the numbers because I felt good about the numbers. The numbers fit how it's being used. For instance, some of the great prophets were translated on the day of translation, things like that. Another way to get these, it's a huge key on how I do the puzzle, solve the puzzles, is the same list of Mars phases has to be used on the Mars calendar and the uniform calendar. Well, the uniform calendar is simpler because it never shifts. Well, the regular Mars calendar shifts very little. It'll be the same for 300 to 700 years. But anyway, one of the ways to do this is the same wheel of 9 days is used on both calendars, and there's just lots of ways to check to see that it's right. I believe now this will not need any correction again. So there you go.
So John,
Okay.
I got a tidbit and a question.
Okay.
I was looking at Enoch's translation, and we're about 25 sacred rounds short of 7,000 sacred rounds since his translation.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So that's probably about I don't know, 18 years. So would you liken intercalation sort of reconciling the circle and the square?
I haven't thought of that comparison before. So I think, no, it's not that as much as, let me see if I can think of a good comparison.
Since the circle's very imprecise. or its precision is?
Yeah, it's you'd think the answer would be, well, you'd think the answer would be it's reconciling a circular orbit. All these pictures I show you show circles for the orbits. That's because in sacred calendars, they're all assumed to be circles where the planet goes at exactly the same rate. And it brings up a question people often ask about the phenomena in the sky. Does it match exactly the sacred calendar? Well, the real planet is not in a circular orbit. Mars is especially far from us. It's like of the what are the 8 real planets, it's the farthest from a circular orbit.
Can its synodic period vary about 3 months or so?
Yeah, it varies. Yeah, it varies quite a bit. And it doesn't go at a constant rate, so it goes faster and slower. And the period all the way around is usually pretty close, but it just has fast and slow parts. Mm-hmm. So these calendars assume everything is a circle and it's going at a constant speed. So there'll be a variation from the actual date. For instance, the actual date of retrograde, the average date is about 78 days. But if you look at the actual time of retrograde motion on Mars, it'll vary from maybe 65 to 90 or something, noticeably from the average. So you'd think the answer to your question would be, aha, it's like instead of a circle to a square, it's a circle to the ellipse of the real, you know what I mean, to the real orbit, which is elliptical. But even that's not quite true, because actually what it is doing is a circular orbit in nice even units, like multiples of 13, like 780, and then to the actual orbit, which in this case is 779, and I think it's 57/63 or something. It comes out even in 63 of all things. I mean, but that's what it actually is. That's not a symbolism or an allegory or comparison. That's what it actually is. But the way the Lord does it, let me add one more thing on how the Lord does it. And I've known this before, and I've published it, and I got bit again because I didn't have enough faith and trust in Him. And that is, anybody can look up the actual period of any of these planets, say Mars, and the average, and the nearest whole number of 13. So they can look up the 780 and the 779 point, whatever it is, 93 something. And then they can use my program on my website called Realignment Cycles, and they can find out when when Mars lines up best with the 13-day Trecina, and how many cycles to count, and they can come up with a calendar for that. Okay, and then they can look to see if God is using that calendar. Well, every time I just do it that way, He's not using that calendar. Even my best one published last week. I mean, it looks like He's using it a lot, but I could tell that lots of dates are wrong. And I did not see how to fix it till I really prayed for help. And then I'll even tell you, I was given 3 words. The Lord can make very short answers. I was given 3 words, which are the key to the whole thing. And you'll see that in my next paper. The 3 words were Enoch governs all.
Oh, wow.
And I had never considered that. The intercalation of the star calendar comes directly from the Enoch calendar. And I have to have the Enoch calendar right before I can ever get the star calendar right. So
you had to retrograde a little bit.
Yes, I had to retrograde. I repented. I have to be reborn. My adult phase the adult phase is, I know astronomy and I can calculate calendars. But when you see, I won't say how it's going to be, but when you see the way the Lord actually works, it is simple, it is elegant, and ancient people could do it without any observations at all, without complicated tables, without. Anyway, I'm using up all the time here, but so that's why I say it will be a witness when you see how it's actually done, instead of, oh gee, Pratt's a clever astronomer guy and figured out a bunch of stuff and who knows if it's right. When you look at it, you'll say, oh my goodness, you mean that actually works? Well, that means that the sun and moon were designed to make it work, as opposed to just fitting something to what happened in nature. So anyway,
So it goes beyond the moon breaking the tie.
Say that again.
It goes beyond the moon breaking the tie.
Yeah. Oh yeah, way beyond, because that's already in there. I've had that in there since 2002, I think, or 3. I have that. There's a reference to that paper in my last paper, and that table hasn't had a change. There is one cycle table, but it could be done without the table by just looking at the phase of the moon when it's time to start an Enoch year. What that really means is you just look at the phase of the moon and try to, if you have a choice on when to intercalate, like if it's either the 20th of March or the 27th, a whole week later, then you look at the phase of the moon on the 2 days, and it's easy to pick which one's correct. So that part was all done, but well, you'll see. That's practical, but not elegant and amazing. So anyway, all right, we are basically time. Is there another quick question, or should we quit here?
I do have another quick question. I don't think it has quite the appeal of the Enoch calendar, but Mars and war. Some have said, and you read over the years, that Mars is the bringer of war. I don't know if it's because of the siege and fall of Jerusalem. I believe in one of your papers you mentioned that
Right.
Mars aligned with that, and then also Nebuchadnezzar and Lehi's day. Is that
right?
Why?
Mars, from all I can tell, Mars is an Aaronic priesthood thing. But remember, as Denver has said more than once, Aaronic priesthood is mostly tied to cursings.
Yeah.
If you mess up, you get cursed. And the way he does cursings is he brings in war and wipes you out and things like that. And so things like the fall, anyway, so I don't associate it with war as much as Aaronic priesthood. And I do the Aaronic priesthood mostly because of John the Baptist. We will see as we go on. Jesus' life was totally on the Venus cycle. Almost nothing in his life is on the Mars calendar. John the Baptist, everything in his life is on the Mars calendar. And he's Mr. Mars. And see, it's Aaronic. It's Aaronic. He's Mr. Aaronic priesthood. Whether or not he had more priesthood, he's symbolic of the Aaronic priesthood.
So is our calendar tied most closely to the Mars calendar?
Oh, ours. What do you mean?
The Gregorian.
Our calendar. Do you mean the Gregorian, or what?
Yeah.
Do you mean?
Yeah, I mean the Gregorian. Gregorian.
It's not tied to any of them. And they're all not. From all I can tell, they're almost the only ones that are tied to each other are kind of Venus and Mercury. From all I can tell, everything else is independent, except for the fact that it's what I call snap to grid concept in my last paper, that they all snap to the grid of every 13 days. So all of the phases of all of the planets occur on one of the holy days on the sacred round, a 1 or a 13. Okay, that's a good place to stop. We'll continue on then next time, starting on 241.
All right. Hey, thanks so much.
You bet. Thanks so
We'll
much.
conclude. Thanks, John.
Bye-bye.
Bye.